So today, we're going to talk about the emotional reactions of C3PO and R2-D2 and how android reactions like these
Where have you been? I've just about had enough of you. No, I don't like you either.
are about to leave the world of science fiction and enter the world of science reality. Don't go away. Hey, I'm Sean Webb, and I'm one of the people helping to make artificial emotional intelligence a reality, also known as giving real emotions to computers. And I figured it would be fun to do a video to explain the process of how C3PO and R2-D2 could actually, and will in the very near future, generate realistic emotional responses such as these.
They shut down the main reactor. We'll be destroyed for sure. This is madness. He tricked me into going this way, but he'll do no better.
And for R2-D2, we really don't know what his beeps and boops mean, so we have to go with his counterpart's reactions.
Don't you call me a mindless philosopher, you overweight glob of grease.
So in this video, we're actually going to focus a lot more on C3PO and a little less on R2-D2, but what we do get from R2 will be rather revealing. And, by the way, for anyone who's about to say that every potential breakdown of Star Wars A New Hope has already been done and everything's been talked about, hold my beer. We're about to do a psychoanalytical breakdown of the artificial emotional intelligence of C3PO and R2-D2. So, we all love Star Wars, right? And we all love the seemingly human-like droids that have become a staple in the Star Wars stories. Up until now, we've assumed that what we watch with these movies and seeing the droids having emotional reactions automatically classifies as far off into the future science fiction. But frankly, that's no longer true. Although you probably didn't know it, science has progressed quite a bit in this area, and we're now on the cusp of releasing the technology to allow artificial personalities to have real human emotions and understand and react to the real human emotions in us. So you know what your emotions are, right? They are those inner feelings we have like anger, fear, sadness, and happiness that drive us into taking action, or sometimes inaction, in our lives. Now, overall, our emotions are designed to serve us and help us live longer lives, such as when our fear helps us run away faster from that killer hippopotamus. But sometimes our emotions can also hinder us, creating depression, stress, and even having long-term negative impacts on our body's physical health. True story. Now, from a process standpoint, your emotions are created by your nervous system, which includes your brain. Now, your brain is your organ of survival. It's there to help you survive from one day to the next. For instance, many of us use our brains to get a job, to make money, so we can buy things like food and shelter, which help us survive. Within each of our brains is something called the limbic system. The limbic system is the portion of our brain that has the particular job of scanning the world around us for threats. So when you look down and see a garden hose laying on the ground and jump at first because you think it's a snake, that's your limbic system at work. It scans your senses and even your thoughts for potential threats to you. And when it finds a threat, your brain creates a negative emotion to urge you into action. Fear, for instance, can help urge us to run. Anger can help urge us to fight, etc. Now, within this whole scanning the world for threats process, from the perspective of our brain, a second question must be asked. Well, a threat to what exactly? What is it that's supposed to be protected? Can I have a definition of what needs protecting, please? And it needs this definition because it needs to know what threats are a danger to you and what may be a threat to something else. For instance, if your limbic system looks over at a leafcutter ant, your brain needs to know whether you have leaves or not to determine whether or not that leafcutter ant is a threat to you. If your definition of self includes having leaves, that leafcutter ant may be a threat to you. If you don't have leaves, that leafcutter ant is probably not a big threat to you. So a sense of self is required in your brain as a survival mechanism to compare potential threats against. In today's world, that comes through as, well, you hear about layoffs coming at AT&T. In order to address whether that's a threat to you, your brain needs to know whether you're associated with AT&T or not. If you are, you get nervous about your job, and if you're not, you don't care about the oncoming layoffs at AT&T. So this mind's self thing, this definition of you and your mind, is of ultimate importance when it comes to how your subconscious emotions work. If something makes it onto your mind's self map, let's call it, you can have an emotion about it. And if something doesn't make your mind's self map, you can't have an emotion about it. And it's just that simple. Now, understanding your mind's self is the key to understanding all your emotions in life. And also the path to taking charge of your life. This self thing takes up fully 1/2 of your mind's mental processing, statistically speaking, and creates 1/2 of what's called your equation of emotion, which is what your brain uses to create every emotional reaction you have ever and will ever have in your life. Your brain compares your mind's self stuff to your limbic system's perception and appraisal process connected with whatever's going on in the world around you, or maybe even within you if you're scanning your thoughts. And if an event in the world or a thought in your head is associated with something on your self map, the output of that equation becomes an emotion that drives you into action. If you're interested in understanding more about the human side of this, read a book I wrote called Mind Hacking Happiness. It's been called one of the best books on the human mind currently in print, and it teaches you how to hack into your mind to change your programming and make your life exactly as you want it to be. Now, I had to figure out all the nooks and crannies of the human mind to be able to understand how to build the nooks and crannies of an artificial mind, so I wrote you a book about it. So there you go. But we all know why we're here. We all know why we started this video. And of course, our Star Wars droids' emotional processing systems work the exact same way ours do. Let's look at the diagram. In an artificial personality's case, they have sensors that take in the events around them and help create their perception. Some cognitive processing then helps them contextualize and valence the events in the world around them, meaning they define what's happening, then judge whether that's a good or bad thing in general. And after they've understanding of those events, they can then check their self-map to see if those events impact their personal existence in any way, at which point they will have an emotional reaction about that event or thought in their heads. Now, the one little detail that's important to understand in both being able to understand how droid emotions work, not to mention how your emotions work, is that this little map of the self in our minds is more than just our bodies. Typically, we think of the self as what we see in the mirror, right? But in reality, your mind's self is everything you associate as a part of your life. The people around you whom you care about become part of yourself, which is why you can have emotional reactions about those people. The stuff you own becomes a part of yourself, which is why you can have emotional reactions about your stuff. Your job becomes a part of yourself, which is why you can have emotional reactions about your job. Even your ideas and opinions get mapped onto your mind's self. So when something happens in the world that affects one of the things on your self map, you have an emotional reaction to it. For instance, if someone insults your religion or your politics or your ethnic heritage or your favorite sports team, you get bent out of shape a little bit. Or if someone compliments that same thing, you feel good about it. And the same is true for any artificial personality processing emotions. You'll better see and better understand droid emotions when we map the things that C3PO and R2-D2 become attached to, which they are then programmed to defend, and which help create their emotional reactions. So in this first clip, at the beginning of the first Star Wars movie of all time, the very first characters we're introduced to are C3PO and R2-D2. And right away, with Vader's Star Destroyer overtaking what we now know as Princess Leia's cruiser, C3PO is already neck deep into some emotional processing.
They shut down the main reactor. We'll be destroyed for sure. This is madness.
So in our first line from C3PO, we're shown a bit of fear from an android. And that his calculations of potential outcomes may not paint the rosiest of pictures. And so this reveals two things to us. First, that C3PO does indeed have some sort of a sense of self in there, and that his perceptions of things may skew a bit negative. Now, the fear reaction, of course, makes sense because fear is the universal response to identifying a potential threat to self, and the Empire is moving down upon them, and C3PO sees that as a potential physical end to C3PO altogether. But that negative perception bias, looking at things pessimistically, has to be a part of his programming as a droid. That doesn't just happen naturally. For a droid with the capability to do a statistical probability analysis for every situation that could present itself, for a pessimism bias to occur, there needs to be something else written into his code that overrides that simple math calculation for every life situation. Otherwise, he'd simply be spouting statistics all day, like the probability will be destroyed at 78.9%. Now, let's not forget in this moment that we'll later learn after watching episode 1, The Phantom Menace, who it was that originally assembled C3PO, none other than a young Anakin Skywalker, who at the time was living a pretty crappy life as a slave on Tatooine. So maybe 3PO's negativity bias comes from being programmed by a young oppressed slave boy? Who knows? But C3PO definitely has some negative bias because his outlook is certainly not very optimistic. So this box right here in perception definitely skews negative. So moving forward, in the next moments, we see a little more of C3PO's negative bias with some statistical probability analysis regarding Princess Leia's future.
We're doomed. There'll be no escape for the princess this time.
So here, on 3PO's self map, his sense of self, we're shown a small attachment to Princess Leia, or I would argue, at least his purpose or programming to serve her as his master. So we can put an attachment on his map regarding his mission or purpose, which we'll also see him defend in the future. But next, we'll also see another attachment of self get firmly placed on 3PO's map. Also, watch. Now this one's more subtle. This is said through his actions. 3PO has just shown us that he has a great attachment to R2-D2 and that he risked being shot with a blaster to follow him across the passageway. It's a great scene. And that's huge because that puts his attachment to R2-D2 and his attachment to his very existence in parity. He's willing to risk his life to follow that little blue droid. Now, we'll see this fluctuate back and forth a bit in future scenes depending on the context, but it shows a deep affection that 3PO has for R2-D2. Now, after Leia finds R2-D2 and gives him the Death Star plans, assigning him the mission to deliver them to Obi-Wan Kenobi and ultimately the Yavin base, giving R2-D2 a very important attachment to his self-map. In the next clip, we'll see the emotional reaction of annoyance coming from C-3PO because of this.
At last! Where have you been? They're heading in this direction. What are we going to do? We'll be sent to the spice mines of Kessel or smashed into who knows what. Wait a minute, where are you going?
Now, annoyance is simply a lower level of anger. And anger is the emotion that humans feel when some idea of self is attacked in some way that we wish to defend. Like if you're a Dallas Cowboys fan and someone says the Dallas Cowboys suck, and you're basically like, hey man, fuck you. Because the Dallas Cowboys are an attachment on your self map that you want to defend, even though the Cowboys do indeed suck. But in this instance, C-3PO's entire existence is being threatened by waiting around for R2-D2, and he wants to defend against having to wait around. And it's here that we start to see the close dance between C-3PO's attachment to physical existence and his attachment to R2-D2, because it's not like C-3PO is saying, hey, I'll take a blaster for that guy, no doubt. No, this one's more like, hey, where the hell have you been, dude? You're screwing around with my safety. And so in the next clip, we'll see that 3PO is still attached to his original charter of serving his masters and following the rules of his masters, which is another dance that we'll see going on within 3PO's cognitive circuitry later on in the film.
Hey, you're not permitted in there. It's restricted. You'll be deactivated for sure.
And then R2-D2 insults him.
Don't you call me a mindless philosopher, you overweight glob of grease. Now come on before somebody sees you.
Now, 3PO's anger is completely in line with the wanting to defend an attachment of self, following the rules of his masters, which is that attachment. And so then C-3PO tries to convince R2-D2 to do the same thing. But then R2-D2 pushes back and tells 3PO of an attachment that R2 now has, his secret mission, that R2 thinks needs to be defended at all costs, even if it includes breaking the rules.
Secret mission? What plans? What are you talking about? I'm not getting in there. I'm going to regret this.
So what we're watching here is an interactive dance of two different characters trying to defend their individual attachments of self that they believe is important to their existence, right? Now, if you notice, C-3PO wasn't hot on the idea of attaching to R2-D2's secret mission. He didn't want to put that on his sense of self, and he wasn't going to get into the escape pod in the first place because his attachment to serving his primary purpose of serving his masters and following the rules outweighed his attachment to R2-D2 in that moment. So the weight of the attachment in that moment to R2 was trumped. But then the laser blast happened next to him, and all of a sudden the other option of staying out of the pod became a greater threat to self. So he then elected to go with R2-D2 out of a sense of self-preservation. As they leave, he double checks the safety level of the escape pod, which is right in line with his self-preservation motivations.
Are you sure this thing is safe?
So then down on Tatooine, we're served up more of C-3PO's negative perception bias.
We seem to be made to suffer. It's our lot in life. What a desolate place this is.
And then R2-D2 and C-3PO have their spat about which way to go. and 3PO has an internal battle to contend with.
Where do you think you're going? Well, I'm not going that way. It's much too rocky. This way is much easier. What makes you think there are settlements over there? Don't get technical with me. What mission? What are you talking about? I've just about had enough of you. Go that way. You'll be malfunctioning within a day, you nearsighted scrap pile.
So first, 3PO has the argument that his way is an easier physical path, which serves his defensive self tendencies. Then he learns that the reason R2-D2 is arguing to go the other way is connected with an attachment that R2-D2 has to the secret mission, which C3PO does not have, nor agrees with, which then persuades 3PO to decide to split with R2-D2. His anger with the situation has to do with the fact that his survival probabilities decrease with them splitting up, which, he wants to defend against. So he tries to angrily convince R2 to come with him, suggesting that R2 is likely to malfunction and die without him. Then R2, attached to his do-or-die mission, tries to convince 3PO not to split up for the same reasons, which actually serve to increase the probability of the mission succeeds. Now notice that it's always the mission with R2-D2. It's never worries about himself. And so here we start to see R2-D2 as a badass special forces operative in droid's clothing.
No more adventures. I'm not going that way.
And so there goes R2 off to serve the mission. Danger be damned. And 3PO is off to stew in his selfish negative perception bias.
That malfunctioning little twerp. This is all his fault. He tricked me into going this way, but he'll do no better.
Now, don't worry. Every story has static and dynamic characters, meaning some characters remain unchanged throughout the story, and some characters change as a result of what happens in the story. And it's the dynamic characters that are the most interesting. So know that C3PO is a dynamic character whose sense of self does change over time, which we will see near the end of the movie, because this isn't the worst we're going to see from C3PO, by the way. Next, we pick up our droid duo in the Jawa crawler, where 3PO's anger is replaced with the elation of being reunited with his friend.
R2? R2-D2, it is you! It is you!
But then, when the crawler stops at the Skywalker Ranch, 3PO goes right back to serving his original purpose, which is serving a master of some sort.
You, I suppose you're programmed for etiquette and protocol.
Protocol? Why, it's my primary function, sir. I am well versed in all the customs.
I have no need for a protocol droid.
Of course you haven't, sir. Not in an environment such as this. That is why I have been programmed.
What I really need is a droid who understands the binary language of moisture evaporators.
Evaporators? Sir, my first job was programming binary load lifters, very similar to your evaporators in most respects.
Can you speak Bocce?
Of course I can, sir. It's like a second language to me. I'm as
Yeah, all right,
fluent in...
shut up. I'll take this
Shutting
one.
up, sir.
So this interaction is completely in line with C3PO serving his attachment to his primary purpose of being a helpful droid to whomever owns him. And notice that C3PO doesn't come to his friend's defense or help forward R2's mission when they're about to be separated again.
You can waste time with your friends when your chores are done. Now, come on, get to it.
All right, come on. And the red one, come on. Well, come on, Red, let's go!
So it seems that 3PO's primary programming to serve his owner wins the day over all other influences when push comes to shove, meaning that it is the most core attachment he has to his self map. But just then the opportunity comes available to serve both his friend and his new master.
Uncle Owen,
Yeah?
this R2 unit has a bad motivator, look!
Hey, what are you trying to push on us?
Excuse me, sir, but that R2 unit is in prime condition. A real bargain.
Uncle Owen,
Yeah?
what about that one?
What about that blue one? We'll take that one.
I'm quite sure you'll be very pleased with that one, sir. He really is in first-class condition. I've worked with him before.
So he's still serving his masters, which is something very near and dear to the center of his self-map. But while he's at it, he gets to keep his friend and potentially get some influence into his friend's self-map by pointing out that he helped R2 at the end of this next clip. So he's trying to bring his friend in line with his personal goals still, not trying to support his friend.
Now, don't you forget this. Why I should stick my neck out for you is quite beyond my capacity.
Now, going off script a little here, I think it's interesting that 3PO said it was beyond his capability to understand why he took the actions that he took, meaning he doesn't understand why he has the emotional urges he experiences and acts upon, but he has them anyway and acts upon them anyway. Now, ironically, this is exactly the situation that most humans find themselves in, which is why humans get all emotionally twisted and they're just reacting to their internal emotional programming without knowing why that emotional stuff is occurring. This means they can't take charge of any of the variables in their mind and control their emotional destiny and ultimately control their core motivations and their life. Again, I'm going to plug the book just because you need to read it. But let's get back to the droids for a second and not being able to control their emotions. And let's switch gears on 3PO for a second. Forgive the pun. In this next clip, 3PO's perception in his equation of emotion comes by the way of an oil bath, which ultimately increases the efficiency in his joints, which of course relates to him being a better servant. Now, the emotion in question here is actually one of anticipation, where he says this oil bath is going to feel so good, which is actually a happiness that will occur in the future. It has a time component. But it's a perception which is going to match with his expectation or preference in his equation of emotion, because it's going to make him a better servant if his joints are working better, which will make him happy. Now, we should take note that he expresses this reaction in a very human fashion, speaking of how the oil bath feels, when the reality is it's a simple sensor measurement. We'll discuss the humanization of his emotional reactions soon. For now, let's just watch the clip.
Thank the maker. This oil bath is going to feel so good.
Now, no doubt his programming is designed to make him seem more human so he doesn't get caught in uncanny valley, which is that place where reactions of robots just aren't quite real enough and freaks us out. And so now 3PO continues acting upon his serving his master's attachment here, adding some self-deprecation for some ingratiating flavor.
Is there anything I might do to help?
Oh, not unless you can alter time, speed up the harvest, or teleport me off this rock.
I don't think so, sir. I'm only a droid and not very knowledgeable about such things. And I am C3PO, Human-Cyborg Relations. And this is my counterpart, R2-D2.
And then the Leia hologram happens, which provides some annoyance for 3PO that R2 isn't on the plan to serve his new masters yet.
Were you on a Star Cruiser?
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
What's this?
What is what? He asked you a question. What is that?
So 3PO stays in his serving his masters mode by providing R2-D2 beep-boop translation.
Oh, he says it's nothing, sir. Merely a malfunction, old data. Pay it no mind.
Giving up the intel on their previous activities and suggesting to R2 that he should do the same.
I think she was a passenger on our last voyage, a person of some importance, as I believe. Our captain was attached
Is there any
to...
more to this recording?
Behave yourself, R2. You're going to get us into trouble. It's all right, you can trust him. He's our new master.
And then R2-D2 does some human engineering to serve his need to defend his attachment to his mission.
Sounds like she's in trouble. I better play back the whole thing.
He says the restraining bolt has short-circuited his recording system. He suggests that if you remove the bolt, he might be able to play back the entire recording.
Oh, yeah, well.
Now notice here that C3PO is in on the deception a little here, however. He does know R2 is deceiving Luke and did not elect to tell Luke outright that R2 is lying to him. That said, 3PO does yet again try to get R2 better aligned with 3PO's attachment to serve their new masters.
I'm sorry, sir, but he appears to have picked up a slight flutter.
Here, see what you can do with him. I'll be right back.
Just you reconsider playing that message for him. No, I don't think he likes you at all. No, I don't like you either.
And it's a little funny that R2 has those questions about Luke and 3PO liking him, making that disappointed whistle sound at the end, which could be a little character or personality quirk. But we know that's simply a reaction to information connected with how manipulable both Luke and 3PO now are if they don't like him, because R2 is all about completing his mission, as evidenced by the after-dinner scene where R2 has immediately departed Skywalker Ranch, which is when we see some real fear from 3PO in that he feels threatened that R2's actions may put 3PO himself in jeopardy.
Oh!
What are you doing hiding back there?
It wasn't my fault, sir. Please don't deactivate me. I told him not to go, but he's faulty, malfunctioning. Kept babbling on about his mission.
Now, the fear response in 3PO comes about entirely logically because his perception is that R2-D2 does indeed fall strongly near the center of 3PO's self-map, and the emotional processing of 3PO sees that something from within his self-map has done something to anger his new master. So his fear regarding threat of retaliation on C3PO himself and potentially retaliation on R2-D2, another portion of 3PO's self, brings a large reaction of fear to the surface. It's a threat to self, to 3PO's self, and to R2-D2, which is part of his self as well, which is completely logical. So then the next morning, 3PO really tries to convince R2 to release his attachment to his mission, which has been the cause of every negative emotion that 3PO has had in the last couple of days.
Master Luke is your rightful owner now. We'll have no more of this Obi-Wan Kenobi gibberish. And don't talk to me of your mission either. You're fortunate he doesn't blast you into a million pieces right here.
And then we're served up with a 3PO memory malfunction and a return to his negative perception bias.
Where am I? I must have taken a bad step.
Can you stand? We've got to get out of here before the Sand People return.
I don't think I can make it. You go on, Master Luke. There's no sense in you risking yourself on my account. I'm done for.
And so now we skip a big part of the movie where Obi-Wan Kenobi teaches Luke about the Force, gives him his lightsaber. Luke goes back to find his aunt and uncle dead, and Obi-Wan Kenobi convinces him to go to Mos Eisley and leave the planet. And here it is. We're here. I can't even believe that we are at this point. I'm very sorry to have included this clip in this analysis. It is the most difficult clip for me because it shows C3PO at his lowest with a perception of C3PO that isn't very flattering regarding what it reveals about his personality.
I can't abide those Jawas. Disgusting creatures.
And so it's here that we learn at this point in his life, C3PO is a closet racist.
I can't abide those Jawas. Disgusting creatures.
Hey, I didn't say it. Don't get mad at me.
Disgusting creatures.
I mean, we really should have seen it coming, right? Big orange head, unwaveringly selfish tendencies, thinks that another group of creatures in the universe somehow has less value than he does. Don't worry. There is hope for our favorite droid. Remember that he's a dynamic character, and he completely embraces some small brown people on Endor later in Episode 6. Next, C-3PO expresses some tactical analysis in a very human way.
I don't like the look of this.
And now, this isn't the first time that we've seen 3PO take a simple perception and put a very human reaction to it. Previously, with the oil bath, he raved on about how it was going to feel so good. But that's not a natural reaction for a set of computer circuits. To be able to seem human, a second portion of processing needs to be done to make a reaction to a calculation seem human, because a reaction to an oil bath doesn't require any verbal reaction at all. Just get the bath and have your joints work better, and yay. But the same is true of a tactical analysis of what should be done when stormtroopers are closing in. The extra human-like reaction of, I don't like the look of this, comes through extra programming that must be completed to create a number of appropriate human-like reactions to particular emotional situations. And that programming exists in this little box right here. And all artificial personalities have this laundry list of simulated human reactions that they can pull from to express outwardly the emotional conclusion their processing has generated. Now, we do this naturally as humans, right? We cry when we get sad. Our face gets red when we get mad. Our bellies get butterflies and our voice shakes when we get nervous. We pick appropriate words to try to convey what we're feeling, or at least we try to. But droids don't have those natural reactions and need to generate their verbal and nonverbal reactions to communicate how they feel. But they need programming to do it. And so their reactions come from a bank of data, which can include human-like verbal and nonverbal responses that are appropriate for the emotional responses that they've calculated. These responses either have been curated by programmers, or they could have been potentially learned behaviors picked up by watching other humans have similar emotional reactions to similar scenarios, but they are always going to be simulated responses and always pulled from a bank of data. For instance, in the future, when the talking robot Sophia exhibits outward human characteristics to happiness or sadness or disgust based on her cognitive processing of real-world information through conversations or her processing of world news, her facial expressions will be expressions programmed by the tech team, which, based on actual human facial expressions, are what her face should look like if she's having those reactions. For instance, if someone starts talking to her about the Dallas Cowboys, Sophia will obviously need to select facial expressions congruent with disgust or dislike for that conversation. Can you tell I don't like the Cowboys? Anyway, just kidding. So, 3PO's display of his emotional processing in his "I don't like the look of this" is certainly a communication that their tactical situation is turning sour. But it's simply an artificial facade that gets laid over the top of the reaction to make him seem more human than he is. Now, there could be dozens of reactions he could pull from. For instance, 3PO could have said, "Oh shit. R2, I believe we should make like a tree and leave. R2, let's make like a hockey team and get the puck out of here. R2, we should leave. I don't like the thought of droid prison. I don't want a butthole. R2, it's time to fly, homie." But regardless of what response it is, they'll all be programmed fakeries applied to the artificial emotion process going on beneath the behavioral layer. Now, don't get me started on HBO's Westworld series. I am going to do a whole set of videos on Westworld. Yeah, amazing stuff coming there. Okay, so moving on. C3PO has some concerns now about R2-D2's game of alien chess with Chewbacca.
Now be careful, R2. You made a fair move. Screaming about it can't help you.
Let him have it. It's not wise to upset a Wookiee.
But sir, nobody worries about upsetting a droid.
It's because a droid don't pull people's arms out of their sockets when they lose.
I see your point, sir. I suggest a new strategy, R2. Let the Wookiee win.
So first, C3PO wants to warn against making a move that will beat Luke's friend because he's all about serving the master, that attachment that he has. Then, upon assessing the additional threat of physical violence to R2's tin can, suggests that R2 remove that threat by letting Chewbacca win the game, which of course defends C3PO's attachment of self to R2-D2, right? He wants to defend that R2 attachment that he has. It's on his self map. And so his emotional processing and verbal suggestions certainly make complete computing logic sense and seem to be very human at the same time. And so now we get to the part of the movie where C3PO starts to change a little. So in our next scene, we find ourselves on the Death Star, where 3PO is still serving his serving the master attachment.
All systems have been alerted to your presence, sir. The main entrance seems to be the only way in or out. All other information on your level is restricted.
Open up in there. Open up in there.
Oh no.
But now, because his new master Luke has a large attachment to the mission of getting the Death Star plans to Yavin and saving Princess Leia, C3PO himself finds himself defending the mission and is now thus on the team rather than being a servant or an extension of one of the other characters, and now has the drive to create a deception so as to serve the mission. He's going to do some human engineering of his own.
They're madmen. They're heading for the prison level. If you hurry, you might catch them.
Now, he continues this deception in the following moments to escape the Imperial guard by taking R2 down to maintenance, then reconnects with Master Luke only to inadvertently have a strongly negative emotional reaction to the perception that he accidentally killed everyone. Now, note, before we watch this, that his shaking and convulsing and jerking also needs to be programmed in as a response.
Listen to them. They're dying, R2. Curse my metal body. I wasn't fast enough. It's all my fault. My poor master.
Now, of course, he would feel bad about that situation because his primary role as servant to his master would certainly be taking a big hit if he accidentally killed his master through his inactions. Sadness, the emotion of sadness, is the reaction we have to experiencing loss, right? And if that were the situation, he would have experienced loss at a profound level that he wasn't able to serve his master. But this particular situation also serves up a good lesson in that our perceptions in life do not at all need to be based in reality to create negative emotions for us or for these droids. The perceptions we have can create false or unnecessary negative emotions for us if we believe something in our heads that's not true, just like they did in this scenario with C3PO. Now, after this point, the droids play a smaller role in the movie because there's a lot of development of the story, except where R2-D2 saves everyone by activating the hyperdrive. That was a big part. And we fast forward to the end of the movie where 3PO and R2-D2 are now saying goodbye before R2's very dangerous mission with Luke to go blow up the Death Star.
Hang on tight, R2. You've got to come back. You wouldn't want my life to get boring, would you?
So in this instance, C3PO has a lot on the line. His best buddy, for which we have seen in multiple instances throughout the movie that 3PO has toyed with risking his physical safety and following R2, that particular self-attachment, is now about to leave on a likely suicide mission. Now, frankly, C3PO suggests that a good reason that R2 should stay safe would be that he could continue serving as a little life spice or life excitement for 3PO, which is kind of a sick devaluation of R2's entire existence and realistically a rather dickish thing to say, if it's not simply C3PO's first attempt at a stab at humor, which is, by the way, something we have not seen from C3PO until now, so that might be highly unlikely, just something to think about. A more realistic and honest assessment would be for C3PO to say, R2, please come back because you're a large part of what I consider my life to be, which is a much nicer and even more endearing thing to say in front of a movie audience, but it wouldn't have been very human because we like to downplay our true emotions and cover up our feelings, so we'll let the writers slide on this one. And then the moment of truth happens. C3PO perceives that he has lost his friend.
I've lost R2. The Death Star has cleared the planet. The Death Star has cleared the planet.
And he is gripped by a dreaded silence, which is very human. Notice that he looks at Leia to make a connection, and she's like, we lost a droid, big deal. But then he looks slowly back to the battle situation with a shocked, delayed distance on his unchanging face, a masterful bit of acting by Anthony Daniels' part to show emotion where no facial expression is possible. Masterful. And then Leia only looks at C-3PO for a connection when she's confirmed that the thing that she cares about over R2-D2, including the Rebel base, the rebellion itself, the Republic, and even freedom in the galaxy, are about to be blasted to smithereens when the Death Star has cleared the planet. He looks to her when he feels dread. She looks to him when she feels dread. It's a great bit of editing. Let's watch it again.
I've lost R2. The Death Star has cleared the planet. The Death Star has cleared the planet.
And then they destroy the Death Star, and only after the battle is won do we get an update on our favorite R2 droid.
Oh, no.
Oh my, R2, can you hear me? Say something. You can repair him, can't you?
We'll get to work on him right away.
You must repair him. Sir, if any of my circuits or gears will help, I'll gladly donate them.
He'll be all right.
And this is the moment of C-3PO's transition, where 3PO is willing to give up part of his own existence to save his friend. And this is where the metamorphosis from selfish asshole 3PO, who followed what is best for him throughout the whole movie, to an artificial personality willing to make an altruistic sacrifice for the benefit of someone else, happens. Because up until that point, if you were to ask C-3PO if he would sacrifice any portion of himself for anything other than serving his masters, he would simply have walked away from you. But now, he's willing to give up functionality of his circuits and gears to save his friend, and thus completes the dynamic transition from selfish racist jerk in the golden wife beater to selfless altruistic hero.
Sir, if any of my circuits or gears will help, I'll gladly donate them.
And fortunately, we learn that R2-D2 is completely repairable when the selfish little tin can loudly interrupts the awards ceremony, which he has disrespectfully arrived late to, simply walking in with that stupid wobble. And what is the deal with that? Because they could fix everything on him but his wheels, that he now has to wobble in on the festivities? Okay, thanks for sticking with us for the explanation of how artificial emotional intelligence works and how it would actually work to generate every one of C3PO's simulated individual emotions in Star Wars A New Hope. Don't forget to subscribe for more cool videos where we'll be looking at other emotional reactions of Star Wars droids, reviewing the AEI of other movie robots, and maybe even educating you on how some of your inner stuff works. Hope this message finds you well. Talk to you soon. Peace.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain.
When you die, on your deathbed, you will receive total consciousness.
I'm not trying to sell you on this idea in the sense of converting you to it. I want you to play with it. I want you to think of its possibilities. I'm not trying to prove it. I'm just putting it forward as a possibility of life to think about.
Welcome to Mind Hacking Happiness. Calm the fuck down and take your seats.
The only way to get rid of it is to accept it as it is right now.
Some people say a science of consciousness is impossible. I think that we may need one or two ideas that initially seem crazy before we can come to grips with consciousness.
Gunga, gunga, gunga.